Good afternoon, and welcome to part 7 of my series on conscious living. Today we're going to be covering the ego, and the ego is quite a complicated topic, and we only have a short space of time to try and break it down a little bit. But the ego we're going to chat about today is the part of us, it's kind of our mental story, the part that we identify or the part that we think is who we are, ourselves, in other words. Hi, Faye, thanks for joining us. So this ego hates change, and the ego will attach itself or grab on to, or latch on to anything and everything around it. And that could be our titles, our partners, things that we like, our desires, and it just won't let them go. So today we're going to chat a bit about the ego. We're going to talk about how it identifies with these things in our lives and how it creates this false sense of identity and creates this really false mental story of who we are. And how we can sort of step back a bit from this ego identity, and it'll give us a lot more clarity of purpose and make us a lot calmer as well once we can step out of the stream of this egoic thinking, so to speak. So let's enter. Thank you. Welcome to everyone that's joined us. Those of you that are joining me for the first time, just to repeat that my videos are archived on my page, and you can go back there because I do refer back to some of the previous videos, and they are all marked in order. So this is the second last in the series of 8. Tomorrow we'll just integrate all these past 8 sessions, and then we'll decide where to go from there. But right, let's step into the session 7 on the ego. Let's pop up there, sorry. Okay, so the objective today is we're going to clarify the relationship between mindfulness and the self. We're going to look at how mindfulness creates this different relationship with the self, so that we can't not live with the ego. So we cannot get rid of the ego totally. The ego is there, and the ego sort of helps keep us sort of alive. It's very much to do with survival because the ego is very fear-based. Hi, Rain. Thanks for joining. So we don't want to get rid of the ego, but we want to have a better relationship with it, and we don't want it to rule us or dominate us. And we're also we've spoken at length in the previous series about how we're trying to create a sense of self where we are an ever-present observer, or like when we spoke right in the beginning about the hurricane, how we want you to be able to manage yourself from a perspective of a center, a calm center where we can sort of enter the hurricane and work from there. And then the other problem with the ego is it's extremely static. Like I said, it grabs onto something, holds on, gets its claws in, and won't let go. And so when things change, it becomes extremely fearful and needy and insecure and holds on and holds on and holds on instead of just letting go. So we're trying to create a more dynamic sense of self, a much more fluid sense of who you are, an ever-changing sense of who you are. As times change, so we have to rewrite our stories. And we don't have to be living the same story that we have since time immemorial. So some theoretical background on this. A good question to ask yourself is, if I ask you the question, who are you? Not what are you? And we'll do this in an exercise a little bit later in the session, but who are you? Because most of us will say, well, my name's Greg, I'm so old, I'm a psychologist, I've got 2 sons, That's who we think we are, but this is what we are. But when I ask who you are, it's a lot tougher question to answer. And most of us don't really know the answer to that question when we say, who are you? Because they're so used to identifying with things or people or situations or titles, like I said. So this question around what is it that we identify with rather than who am I? And how we tend to identify with our stories. So if our teachers told us something, or our parents told us something, or bullies at school, or our elder brother or sister, so we end up grabbing onto these stories, these programs, so to speak, and this becomes our life script, okay, or our life drama. So our self is very complicated, and who we are is extremely complicated. So it's not a simple answer, but it's something that I want you to rack your heads around, or at least start reflecting on. And today we're going to chat a little bit about, we have many different theories to self, but the constructivist approach is probably the most simplistic. And the constructivist approach just literally says, as I go through life, so I gather up my idea of who I am, based on my upbringing, based on my culture, based on my family, etc. So we grow, we learn to identify with new things, thoughts, feelings, and both nature and nurture contribute to this me and the idea of who I am. So over time, this me story develops, as I said, based on our life history, defining our dominant attributes. So if you've got a sense of humor, if you're a kind person, if you're grumpy as all hell, we all have these different dominant attributes, and then we evaluate these. We look at them against other people, and if we see other people are maybe not as friendly as I am, then I would call myself friendly. Whether I'm punctual, etc. And we also identify with the bad traits as well. I'm insecure, I might be impulsive or reactive. And then we construct cause and effect relationships, and we talk about this in a bit more depth in the session as well. So because of this happened to me when I was young, that's why I'm like this. So, and we seem to think that it has to be like that just because something happened as a kid, and therefore I must act like this now as an adult. But it's not so. That's just our mental programming or our mental story, and we can let go of these. So we look for this, and once we've got the story of ourselves, we constantly end up striving and looking for proof of this fact about who I am. And like we spoke about in the previous session on attachment and acceptance, we spoke about, and compassion, we look for proof that we are not loved or that we are certain ways. And this idea of seek and you shall find, we constantly go around looking to prove it. And I often find many people, let's just say they're looking for a partner, and they say, I'm trying to find love in my life. And this is at a conscious level, they're trying to find love and happiness. But at an unconscious level, there's a whole lot of stuff there. I don't love myself. No one loves me. No one's going to want me. And so they're constantly looking to prove that mental story. So it's important to find this shadow, this negative mental story that's creating all the distress in our life. And once we understand the ego, the minute you see the ego, you can get rid of it because it's been spotted. Because by thinking of this ego, straight away you have to step into an observer role. And that's exactly where we're trying to get everyone into this observer perspective. Okay. So, like I said, we've talked about this in a previous session. We only believe that which makes us happy. So when we do maybe find love, if we stick to that metaphor, we'll also struggle with it because we, at a deeper level or in our unconscious or in our shadow, there's a big part that says I'm unlovable. So we won't believe that the person actually loves us because my ego is telling me something else. And so we'll constantly strive to disprove it or start feeling very uncomfortable or else sabotage that relationship in order to not feel discomfort. Okay. So mindfulness helps you to step back, ready to observe our story rather than being active within the story. And it's okay to have the story, but we just want you to take one small step back from it. There's a number of different metaphors we can talk about. We often say that there's the blue sky metaphor, where it's the sky versus the clouds. The blue sky stays blue all the time. Doesn't matter if there's thunder clouds, doesn't matter if it's white fluffy clouds, or like today there's a few white fluffy clouds, or if it's all grey, there's still the permanent blue sky in the background. So we need to remember that we are the sky and not the clouds. Okay? And if it was a floor versus a carpet, in my office here I've got a tiled floor with a carpet in it. The carpet can move in and out. The tiled floor is permanent. So you'd rather be the tiled floor than the carpet. And in the lamp metaphor speaks about, and this gives you some idea of where we're trying to go with this observer self, that if you have a lamp in the middle of a room that spins around like a lighthouse and put smoke into a darkened room, you'd see the beam, you'd have the lamp, you'd have a beam of light, and you'd have the light on the wall. Now that sliver of light that's moving around on the wall, that is our mental story. That's where we are if we're caught up in our stories. The beam of light that you see shining in the smoky room is self-awareness. That's, aha, I'm not my story. So now we've stepped a little bit back from our story on the wall, which keeps changing as it moves around the room. But I'm the beam of light, which is self-awareness. And then the observer self, actually who I am, would then be the lamp that's standing in the middle, emitting the light. And once we can understand that, we can create enough psychological distance between myself and the thoughts, or myself and my mental story of who I am, for me to be able to challenge it and say, but I don't like the story, I think I want to go on another angle. So it's extremely important to understand this lamp metaphor. So our core egoic processes, our core processes about the ego, involve this mistaken identification of self. With objects, transient means they can change, so with anything that can change. So even if I identify myself with alcohol, for example, suddenly with lockdown, alcohol gets taken away from me. Now I'm not the friendly guy anymore. I'm a lot more anxious without my alcohol because I over-identified with my alcohol, for example. Or my title, like a lot of people are losing their jobs at the moment or being retrenched, or suddenly they start feeling, am I undervalued? So we've got it's extremely important to realize that there's a whole lot of other processes at play here. I wasn't going to talk about this, but let's just talk about this retentions because it's going to happen quite a bit, and people being laid off work because of COVID and lockdown. Just remember that role or that title that you had, manager of my department, is just one of your roles. You're still someone's mother, you're still a wife probably, you're still a daughter, you're still a sister, you can still be friends with people. So there's a whole lot of other roles that still exist. You're not just that role, for example, in your working life, okay, in that domain. So ultimate meaning is fear that dominates us because fear means mortality, and the ego is involved with this fear of death. And ultimately, it obviously becomes the ultimate physical death, because the ego would die when the body dies, but the ego in life grabs onto all these things and doesn't want any of those things to end, because it thinks then it's going to die in that perspective, like I've just said around a job title, for example. So mindfulness allows you to have a more dynamic version of self, not attached to these transitory pillars, and to realize that my life goes on. One pillar might end, but because I'm not over-identified with just that one role, and realize I'm a whole lot of other stuff, plus I'm my observer self, I can carry on. And yes, it's sad to lose a perspective or lose one of those roles, but I can move on with my life. So then we talk about the ego as a shopping cart. This is a wonderful metaphor that I think Rain's certainly been in part of my courses, and we've discussed this at length, and it's a lovely metaphor to explain the ego. So when we use the shopping cart metaphor to help you understand the ego, we are actually inside the shopping cart. We're sitting in the shopping cart, and we're identifying with everything that gets put into the shopping cart. So if you put my car in there, if I over-identify with my car, for example, now I love my car, so me and the car become one. Now, if I'm at a traffic light and the car pulls up next to me, that's a lesser car than me, I'm going to think I'm better than the guy next to me. And that's going to be great for a while, until someone else pulls up in a much fancier Range Rover next to my little car, and I look at this person, and now I feel lesser than. So it affects my self-esteem. Now, either I have to go out and get more money, or I have to go and do something to get a better car so I can feel better. So all the things that we put into the shopping cart, we identify with, but this constantly puts us on a continuum of better than or less than. So we're never feeling like we're okay. Also, what gets put into the shopping cart is things that other people say about us. Other people put stuff in your shopping cart as well. They might say you're fat, or you're ugly, or you're thin, or whatever it might be. And then you identify with what they've put into your cart as well. Now, let's say that you perhaps decide that you're now quite clever and decide to go on a spiritual journey, and you realize I shouldn't be identifying with all these things in the cart. So you tip out everything in the cart. Now you get back on your bicycle, and you see this other fancy guy in his fancy car, and you say, look at this idiot. He hasn't reached any of the places I've reached. I'm on a bicycle. I don't need all these trappings. But straight away, you've identified now with the spiritual approach. I saw someone the other day posting a lot about that they meditate now, and they were over-identifying with the fact that they're meditating, and they can't believe why no one else does this thing for 15 minutes a day. But straight away, that's playing into the ego again, and it's starting to say, well, I'm better than you because now I'm attached to being a meditator, for example. Another thing about the shopping cart is we then hold on to everything in the shopping cart, and we don't want to let it go. So we put up our electric fences and our everything to try and protect our identity, because we're scared if we lose that identity, we are going to die. Literally a figurative or a metaphorical death. And then lastly, the other thing that we identify with, the negative stuff in there. Like, let's say we've identified as being a victim, or someone that can't sleep, for example. Next minute, someone else comes along and says, oh, I really can't sleep. I wake up at 2 o'clock every morning, and I don't get back to sleep after 2. And you'll be like, I wake up at 1 o'clock every morning. So now we start trying to be better than someone, but with a negative thing that we've identified with. So this ego as a shopping cart metaphor says what we should do is get out the shopping cart. It's not wrong to have all these things we identify with, but to realize that I'm pushing the shopping cart. And it is quite okay to have your car in there, your degrees, your titles, whatever it is that you identify with, but rather see yourself as pushing the shopping cart around. And this is going to give you a little bit of psychological distance, rather than saying, I am these things. You can have them, but you're not them. All right. So there's just some thoughts to think about, some of the possible things you put into the cart. What are some things others have put into your cart? Are you sometimes jealous of others? Will you compare yourself to others? What is the attribute or thing that you're comparing? What are you most afraid of losing in your life? And are these things that are in your shopping cart? And your biggest takeaway from understanding this metaphor, go away and reflect on this, after this session. Just go and think about it. But I think the biggest one for me when I first understood this was to realize that I can have these things. It's not wrong to want to have a nice car or a nice house or a nice job title, but understand that it's only temporary. That if you do over-identify with it, it's going to make you very scared and extremely insecure of losing those things. Then we speak about the chess metaphor. We've done this in some of the other sessions. I'm well aware of our time limitations on trying to keep these to 30 minutes, and there's a number of slides. So briefly, the chess metaphor just speaks about the two sides in chess and how these sides are in conflict, the black pieces and the white pieces. The one side is full of negative thoughts and emotions, the other one's got positive thoughts and emotions, but they're in conflict. And when we ask people where do they find themselves, they often say, I find myself on the side of the negative, the side of the black pieces. And I'd rather be on the side of the white pieces, the positive thoughts and emotions. But these are also in conflict with the black pieces. So in the chess metaphor, we suggest stepping into the perspective of the chess board, so that the board doesn't care who wins this fight, who wins the conflict between the negative emotions or the negative thoughts and the positive thoughts, because they are at war. The chessboard is merely the territory that it takes place on. And this is where we're trying to get everyone to step back into the observer role. Okay. So today's presentation, we're going to talk about the self as story, building the ego, the expression of the ego, and then moving beyond the ego, how we do this. So when we talk about trying to explain who you are, automatically people would say to me, as I said to you, my name's John, I'm a manager at a bank, or I'm a director, or I'm an MD, or I'm a CEO. People love these big fancy titles. I'm 46, I'm married, 2 kids, 2 dogs. So these are the stories we tell about ourselves. Okay? And these are okay, but does this really define who you are? Does this say who you are? It tells me what you are, but it doesn't say who you are, like we spoke about right in the beginning. Okay? So the ego is a mental construct of self. So this ego, as we say, it's created by all the way through our lives. It's something we construct to define who we are, and it's who we believe we are. And some people don't want to let go of who they think they are, even though it's a learned idea. So some psychological synonyms is a conceptualized self. That means my thought self, my created self. My narrative identity would be the identity you derive based on the story, your story as it's happened from when you were born, and then the constructivist approach, which is learned as you go through life. So the story about me develops through a number of different ways. It's a daily stream of internal chatter. Oh, I'm not good at maths. I'm smart. My freckles make me ugly. No one likes me. I'm better than you. So these are the ways we formulate it. Then you can say, when I was 6, this happened to me. And because this happened, I then became Y. And therefore, I acted like this because I am whatever happened to you when you were young. And I often say to people, and I've said this before in our sessions, that what happened to you when you're young is not happening now. So we shouldn't be living when you were 6 years old, even though most of our dramas or our life script starts from between the ages of 0 and 6, 7 max. And from then we start developing this life script or life drama. We also end up defining our dominant attributes. So I'm a kind of person who does this compared to other people. I think I'm really funny or intelligent or whatever it might be. And then we evaluate these dominant attributes. And we say, well, I don't like about myself that I'm so funny. I take everything as a joke and not serious enough. Compared to other people, they're a lot cleverer than me, etc. So we start rating ourselves against other people. And then same with the number A, cause and effect also starts developing the story of me. This happened because I'm already like this. I'm too nice to everyone. That's why they walk over me like a carpet. And because I did this, this happened. So let's even look at this personal attribute of intelligence. So you can't raise your hands because it's not a live audience. But if you believe that in order to call yourself intelligent, it's crucial to be mathematically skilled, verbally proficient, or creative. Because we've all got ideas of what defines intelligence. But this might not be the case, because we could be living in the Kalahari Desert, and intelligence from the cities would mean nothing in the desert. So for many traits such as intelligence, maturity, idealism, it's difficult to pin down which habits, characteristics, actions, and achievements best reflect them. So it's done this in a previous talk as well. So imagine if you're the only person on the planet. Would you call yourself tall, smart, handsome, pretty, fat, ugly? Would you define yourself by the color of your skin? You wouldn't be able to do it because you'd be the only person. So you need the other side as well. So nothing is absolute and everything exists in relation to something else. And this is based on the comparisons we make and the way we interpret things and events. So you cannot have one without the other, which makes it okay. I often say to many perfectionists, most perfectionists have got a huge amount of imperfection lurking in their shadow, and they've got to integrate that imperfection before they can become whole, because otherwise they're going to be running away from the imperfection for the better part of their lives. So how do we build this ego? The main process that's responsible for the construction of ourselves is this word called identification. So identification means making the same. It comes from the Latin idem, the same, and facere, meaning make. And when we identify with something, we make it and me one. Okay, they become an inseparable part of ourselves, and this is a creation of our mind ratio. So me and my car become one. If someone steals my car, It's the end of the world because my car is now gone, and that means I've literally died because of my over-identification. So we can identify with our possessions. So you can say you're rich, wear designer clothes, drive a big car. You can identify with achievements. You've got promotion. I ran the fastest. I created a successful business. Your job, I'm a doctor, manager, social worker. Sorry, let's just repeat. Your belief system, I know a lot. I'm not someone to mess with. I'm not good at convincing people, or your religion, for example. Your appearance, I look good, I'm ugly, I'm attractive. So all of these things are highly personal. Everything we identify is highly personal, and they can change during our lives. They can be both positive and negative. So we've spoken about the shopping cart metaphor. So all those car, job title, appearances all end up in the shopping cart together with yourself. And you sit in this cart thinking, this is me. So the minute one of those things are lost, or someone comes with a better job, or a better car, or a better job title, they make you feel less than yourself because you think that's who you are. And I need to stress again and remind you to get out the shopping cart and push the shopping cart with those things in it. And you don't need to compare yourself to others because you haven't over-identified with that. And me, who I am, is a lot more than my car, my job title, my appearance. Even me, Greg Smith, as a psychologist, I really dislike it when people label me a psychologist, because even though I am, it's only one part of my role. I've got many other roles that I see myself as. I don't over-identify with the role of a psychologist. So how do our egos develop? So our ego develops based on a whole lot of things. So culture contributes to ego. Parenting, the media, schooling, religion, all of these things contribute to ego. They all come from the outer world, our environments that we live in, and they develop our ego. So we develop our ego based on our cultures, our habits, the food we eat, the music we listen to. Most of us love, certainly in my era, what my parents used to listen to. And then our children love the 80s music because we listen to the 80s music. And standards or norms for normal and or for moral behavior. We get that from our culture. Then parenting, the parents provide values. It's good to work hard, have an honorable job, to be loyal, offer us our belief systems, respect for our local worthies, and perhaps men are not allowed to cry. That's the world I grew up in. Now it's kind of okay. We're saying it's okay to our children. In our days, you couldn't wear pink. Pink was for girls and blues for boys. Now that's all changed. But we developed this based on what we're told. Media, they provide our norms as well. Thin body, money, achievements. The media very much manipulates us into following certain norms. And then our schooling. Schooling can also be it can be good, but it can also be detrimental to someone's ego development. It's also why everyone now gets surprised when you walk across the stage, I think, in some of the junior schools, compared to in the past where you had a first, second, and third, and everyone else felt dumb because there were only 3 clever people in the class. So school will also give you intellectual abilities, give you a strong focus on thinking, and compare your abilities with others to be able to compare. Then religion provides the norms, gives you rules for being good, and beliefs about being human. So all of these things contribute to your ego. Okay? They provide explicit rules, and they stimulate formation of your own rules. So together with what someone's told you, so you develop your own ego through internalization. So what you decide you're going to listen to, and depends on how much it's been indoctrinated. Hi, Anne, thanks for joining us. How much you've been indoctrinated. For example, I know it's a strong word, but pretty much if that's all you hear, and some cultures also won't let you marry out of that culture because they want to keep that culture together. So we internalize this and we identify with this. So this is how our ego develops over time. But it is only a mental story, and it can be changed if we can move out of it. So how do we express this ego? So as you've seen, it's very much an outside-in focus is how the ego gets given to us. Okay. So now we start comparing ourselves to other people. What should I be feeling right now? What's okay? I look on Facebook. I see people look happy. I'm not happy. Is this okay? What are the norms for success? I noticed also on some tapers, if they're contentious issues, no one will comment until someone says, I disagree with that statement, and then suddenly everyone will be, okay, they feel brave and they'll do it. So we won't just act out because of this outside-in focus and this fear of being judged. So we need to move from this outside self. So this, and we did this in one of the other sessions, this internal locus of control versus the external locus of control. But the outside-in focus means the world defines who I am, okay, based on its norms. All right, so we develop a strong fear. And if we have a strong identification with X, we'll have strong effects for ourself and environment. And the more we identify with X, So let's just say it's money, for example, the higher the perceived importance of that X is. And what's inevitable is the realization that that X can disappear. So what happens if I lose all my money that I've been saving, for example, if I've over-identified with money? And it's strange enough, this often happens. I had a chap the one day who came to see me with a lot of anxiety, and he was extremely wealthy, and he lost everything through a bad business decision. So, for example, if you get fired or fail to succeed, and you've over-identified with your title or your car or your money, if you're over-identified with being beautiful and slim and trim, as you get older, you're going to become less beautiful. Now you start getting scared of getting older, okay? And it's huge. It creates a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety for many people. So then we have to control how we're going to deal with this fear. So if you were scared of losing your body, you're going to have plastic surgery, Botox, all that kind of stuff so that you don't have wrinkles. Your possessions will insure our stuff so we don't lose it. And we'll suppress our emotions because I don't want to start feeling bad about how I feel. And that just creates even more problems. So if X determines who I am, me, then the more of X, the stronger I am. So if I'm attached to money or identifying with money, then I'm going to keep chasing money, because it's going to mean that I feel better about myself. It's going to mean that I feel okay. And again, if you identify with beauty and a certain way of looking, the more beautiful you are. I mean, I look at those people that get caught up in this plastic surgery and start looking like monsters out of some Frankenstein movie, thinking they're getting more beautiful. Michael Jackson, perfect example. So he keeps changing his appearance, thinking he's going to be happier and happier and happier. And you're just never going to get happy because it's this fear that I'm getting old, or fear that I'm not going to be beautiful. Or more achievements, and you will never be able to slow down. So you're constantly chasing degrees, etc., or more learning. So every time I add something to this ego, this means that I'm going to be not less than I am now. So the more money I am, it means I won't go backwards. But if I start losing my money, it's going to be dreadful. This is also why I said there's going to be a lot of problems after lockdown, because people's finances are not going to be the same. So if you've over-identified with money, you're going to be going through a struggle. And in the next 3 to 6 months, you're going to start questioning your own identity and probably going through a lot of soul searching, if not deep depression and deep despair. And if you need people to like you, you're going to start becoming more sillier and acting out a lot more so that people will like you more. And all these things, all these ways of trying to add something to the ego always strengthens your positive or your negative version of yourself, depending on which way you've identified. Then jealousy is also extreme maladaptive part of ego, because if a part of your ego is threatened, we then develop this jealousy. And jealousy occurs when the object concerns our self-definition. And this can either increase our motivation if we can see that we're better than the other person, but if not, we're going to need to get better than what we are in order to boost our ego so that we feel better than the person that we're comparing ourselves to. And this can be okay. So if you look at these two examples I'm about to show you, so say you're a musician and your friend becomes a successful dancer, then you could share in their reflected glory because it's a different channel to you. They're not a musician, a struggling musician like you are. But if your friend created a #1 hit and they too were a musician and you didn't, this would create jealousy if you're identifying with this thing about musician. You wouldn't be able to share in that person's success. And you'd rather feel like, well, what has he got? What do people see in him and not me? All right. So there's nothing wrong with being identifying with being a musician. Just don't over-identify with being a musician. So the ego is extremely sensitive to criticism, and any negative feedback on aspects of the ego feels like it's an attack on the ego, an attack on me. And we find it extremely difficult to distinguish the feedback between. So often this can happen in work, and I see this in coaching. And just even this morning, I was talking to someone in a coaching session around this. So the minute you give someone feedback, the person takes it personally, and you're trying to give them feedback about a behavior. But because they've identified with their work ethic, for example, their perfectionism, the minute you criticize something in their work, they feel like they themselves are flawed. And that's not the case. It's their work that you're criticizing. But people don't see that because they don't distinguish themselves from what they're putting out. So defensive behavior happens. Here's another example. So say you're an author of a book. In reality, I write books. Okay, a reviewer reads this book and says, he didn't like the book. He thought it was a lot of junk. Your ego perceives it that I'm a writer, so therefore I must not be good if he's told me that the book was terrible. It's the same with modeling clothes. You know, as I said, I've worked before with a clothing line designer, and they were extremely difficult or struggled to even design clothes because people were going to criticize it. And another one was a painter and couldn't paint because they They wanted to make it so perfect, thinking that no one must criticize the picture. But it's subjective, so people will criticize it. So many judgments reflect personal identifications, labeling things based on what they say about me. And we see this through this lens of judgments. We've spoken about this in session 3 or 4 it was. So how do we move beyond this idea called the ego? So whether you have a car or not, being attractive or not attractive, accomplishing or not accomplishing is not the problem. It's believing the story in your head that tells you that these are things, that this is who you are. This is the problem. And I often remind people, just remind yourself that it's just a story of who I am. It's not who you are. It doesn't matter what happened, that you were poor when you were a kid, or people teased you, and this story became an implant. It's just a story, and you can step back from it and write your new chapters. So when we start using mindfulness in moving beyond the ego, we need to start observing our stories rather than just believing them. We start connecting, and we start teaching ourselves to connect to a sense of self that's beyond the form, that steps back. Kind of like I said, when a psychologist is one of my roles, and of course I don't not identify with it, but it's just one of my roles. It's still not who I am. I like to think I'm Greg. That's the first part of who I am. So we need to connect with ourselves beyond those roles, and then to connect to a dynamic self, because I was a sales guy until 15 years ago, and I was very much into surfing before that, and who knows where I'm going to be in 5 to 10 years time. I might have developed, I want to write books. Maybe I'll be identifying with being an author and doing talks, etc. So it makes it much more fluid if we can have a dynamic sense of self. And this lockdown as well, people are going to have to change. There is not going to be another normal. So who am I going to be now when I emerge from this lockdown crisis and the COVID crisis? So the dynamic sense of self is extremely important to buy into. So this outside-in focus, so remember, mindfulness is an inside-out, where what I've just shown you is how the ego is created from an outside-in perspective. So we want to move back and get control of our lives from an inside-out. So mindfulness tells you or asks you what is important in your life. What do you want to do? How do you feel? And what does success mean to you? And what do you need to do in order to achieve success? So now you start focusing from inside out. Now you can start creating your environment rather than the environment creating you. So just to end on, again, on the shopping cart metaphor, please remember that you need to get out of the cart. Don't sit inside the cart, because you're sitting there, this cart's going downhill, you're bound to lose titles, things in your life, relationships will end, things that we can't control. Many people come to me with their divorces and their relationship breakups. It's got nothing to do with you. And if your partner cheats, it's also still got nothing to do with you. It's got more to do with them. So don't get in and identify yourself with things, because things can change. And it's much better to have, I think in Buddhism they talk about detachment, to have loving detachment. So don't, in Afrikaans they say claw fast, don't claw into things, because there's very little things in life that we can hold on to that won't change, but everything changes. All right, so push your trolley around by all means, but just don't identify with it. Thank you for joining me, and have a lucky Monday. All the best. Cheers.